This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I hope you all had a happy holiday. I hope you all had a good, New Year's, everything like that. We got a lot to talk about in today's episode. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you all of a couple of things. First of all, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. You can do it really easily, really quickly. Just go to the main page of our show, the GSMC Sports Podcast, and whatever you're listening to this on, Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you'll see probably in the top right-hand corner-ish, or maybe even dead center, a little button that just has a plus sign next to it and also says subscribe. If you could hit that button for us, that would mean the absolute world to us. You want to subscribe to the podcast for a couple of reasons, but the main one being you want to get those alerts and those notifications on your phone, on your laptop, on your watch, on whatever device you might be listening to this on. And again, you'll get those alerts and notifications, and you'll know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast. When we release it, you won't have to go look at Twitter or just go, check casually. You'll get those alerts whenever they are released, and then you can, be one of the first people to listen to a new episode again when we release it. So please, if you could subscribe to the podcast on our main page, whatever application or even website you're listening to this on, Spotify, Apple Music, Podbean, please subscribe to us on all those great platforms. We would really appreciate it. Again, please subscribe to the podcast. Also, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general if you are enjoying the content and discussion points of the show, the production, everything that goes on behind the scenes with our great team as well. So if you're just enjoying the show overall, we'd love it if you leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general on that same main page, on that same website or application. Again, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Podbean. You can leave us a review. If you want to write something, you can do that as well, but as long as you just leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, we would really appreciate that if you are enjoying the content of this show just in general. So again, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, in general, anything like that. And also, if you could give us a follow on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us. Just overall, we would love to interact with you guys more on there. So if you follow us on all of those great social media platforms, again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Over on social media, we can talk about sports. We can talk about, maybe some NFL playoff games, maybe whatever the main NBA game is on that night on TNT or ESPN. But just overall on social media, we can talk to you guys, again, about sports breaking news, about anything sports related that you guys want to talk about. Social media is the place to do that, especially in real time. Again, with the, landscape of the NFL and NBA always changing, player movement, games happening, trades, injuries, whatever it may be. Social media is the best way to find our immediate reaction, maybe, or something like that. So again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us, and we would absolutely love it. In addition to subscribing to the podcast and leaving us that review, if you could follow us on all those great social media platforms. One more time, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening, you and your family are happy, healthy during these extremely trying times in the world today. We've got a fantastic show for you all today. Coming up later on in the episode, I want to give you an updated list of the top 10 quarterbacks in the National Football League. I did it at the beginning of the NFL season. I want to do it again now that the regular season is over. Where did the list change? Who is on the list now that wasn't before, i.e. a guy like Josh Allen and things like that. So I want to give you my top 10 NFL quarterbacks in the league right now today. That's the last segment of today's show. Also coming up later on in the show, about every single NFL team besides the Houston Texans has hired a new head coach. I want to give you a letter grade on each and every single one of those head coaching hires that they made. The Jets obviously got Robert Saleh. The Eagles just announced they hired the Colts offensive coordinator. We'll break down each and every single head coaching hire that has been announced, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about the Texans situation, of course, but that's been a constant topic with Watson. That's also coming up later on in the show. And of course, I do want to get to Philip Rivers' retiring and do a State of the Union on the Indianapolis Colts, because I really do believe they have a Super Bowl roster and a Super Bowl caliber head coach. They just need the quarterback. I want to evaluate where the Colts could go in a couple of different directions when it comes to the quarterback position, as well as Dwayne Haskins has signed a contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is back in the NFL. I want to tell you why this might be one of the most underrated signings that go on through the entire NFL offseason, and why it could mean big things for both Pittsburgh and Dwayne Haskins. That is also coming up later on in the show. But I do want to start off with some basketball, actually, as the Nets trio made its debut last night. When you're listening to this, the Nets took on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and Kyrie Irving did play in the game. He returned from his personal issue reasons. He was practicing with the team. And they lost. They lost in double overtime to the Cleveland Cavaliers, 147 to 135. Again, the game went to double overtime. Kyrie Irving had 37 points. Kevin Durant had 38 points. James Harden had 21, 10, and 12. But they lose. And they lost, to be honest with you, rather badly, because this game wasn't necessarily in the Nets' position to begin with. They were down double digits multiple times throughout the entire game, and essentially were trailing the entirety of the game until the fourth quarter, where they took a small lead after tying the game, obviously, and the Cavs sort of battled back and kept pushing the game from regulation time to OT and then into double overtime, and Colin Sexton really just took over. I believe he finished with 42 points on the night. The Cavaliers have been a interesting team to start off. They're 7-7 starting off the season, which is 6th in the Eastern Conference, so they're not a slouch team. That hot start is on the cusp of being proven to be more than a hot start. We're still very early in the season, so a hot start can obviously evaporate like that, and your team can sort of go on a losing streak and a downward spiral. But we're 14 games in. Once we reach that 20-game mark, if the Cavs are still 500 or better, I would officially, qualify them as a good team, as a team that is in the playoff race, in the playoff hunt. And for them to take it to the Nets, the game was obviously in Cleveland, and for the trio's, debut to really be spoiled, it was very interesting to see. What also was very interesting to see is who were the players that took the back seat at certain moments in the game. The only player who did not take a back seat out of the trio, which is Harden, KD, and obviously Kyrie Irving. That's the trio. And everybody's wondering, there's one ball. Who's going to play the Chris Bosh role? Who's going to play, that third superstar, the Klay Thompson role, the Kevin Love role? Who takes a step back and lets the other two guys do their thing. And I was arguing for you that it had to be Kyrie Irving. He was the third best player on that team. Kyrie Irving's obviously an incredible player, definitely a top 5 point guard in the league. You could probably argue that he's top 3, depending on the day and depending on your list, of course. And I said he had to be the one to take the back seat. He is the one. He is worse than James Harden. He's worse than Kevin Durant. Kyrie Irving's never had a scoring title. He's never won an MVP. And he hasn't really been the best player on a completely and truly elite team. His best year in Boston, they went to the Eastern Conference Finals without him. So again, he's never been that best player on one of these elite teams in the league. And I think we all knew that Kevin Durant was the best player on the team, and James Harden was the second best player on that team, then followed by Kyrie Irving, of course. But the only player who didn't take a back seat during the entirety of the game was Kyrie. He was the one who was constantly putting up shots, having the ball in his hands, and never taking a moment to step back. At the beginning of the game, it was Kevin Durant. He was the one who was taking the step back, taking the less of the shots. But as the game went on, it actually became Harden who was taking more of a passive backseat role, and he was getting more assists than points. And he obviously, when you just look at the box score, he was the one who scored the less and shot less out of everybody, which was interesting to say the least, because in my opinion, again, it has to be Kyrie Irving. And a lot of the final shots that were being taken in both fourth quarter and the first overtime, before the Cavs really blew it out of the water in the second overtime, was Kyrie. He was the one who took the game-winning shot at the end of regulation to try to tie it. And of course, Kevin Durant got one of those final shots up as well. But Kyrie Irving taking a majority of the late game shots, and then also was pretty much getting abused by Colin Sexton on the defensive end of the floor. While he did finish with 38 points, it was not a great showing, in my opinion, for Kyrie. He proved, in my opinion, that he needs to be the one taking taking less shots. Some of those shots that he were missing at the end of the game need to go to James Harden. And I think I trust more Harden from three in a late game situation. I think I do Kyrie at this point. And I know Kyrie has hit big time shot after big time shot time and time again. But when I think of all those big time shots that he has hit over the course of his career, I think about his days in Cleveland. I don't think about those days in Boston or these early New York Nets days right now. Or Brooklyn Nets is what I should actually say. I don't see him hitting a lot of these game-tying, game-winning shots in different uniforms besides his Cleveland Cavalier uniforms. I know James Harden has hit game-time shots for the Houston Rockets recently, within years past, within 2 or 3 years, really. And even this year, he hit a couple of big-time shots for them as well. And he also hit one with the Nets already. He was the one who had really the icing bucket against the Milwaukee Bucks in that game, and he really took over in the fourth quarter of that one and even had more shots than Kevin did at the end of the game. In my opinion, this duo of James Harden and Kevin Durant can win the East with or without Kyrie Irving, and they will win the East with Kyrie, assuming that he's staying with the team throughout the entire year and nothing else really pops up for him. But it needs to be Kevin Durant and James Harden's team, if that makes sense. Kyrie is the luxury. Kyrie is the guy who is super skillful, super talented, absolutely will help you win a championship, and absolutely should get 20 shots up a game. I'm not saying that Kyrie Irving needs to take less shots than he has his entire career, but Kyrie has played second fiddle before. And for Kyrie Irving to take 28 shots last night, while James Harden is only taking 14 and Kevin Durant's only taking 25, that's not how it should be working. It should be the reverse, right? In fact, it should be even more than the reverse, right? Kevin Durant should be the one taking 28 shots, and then James Harden should be the one taking 25 shots. But I'm not even saying that Kyrie Irving should be taking only 14 shots like James Harden did. I think he could get up to 20. But especially in the late game of the fourth quarter, unless there's a mismatch that you're looking to exploit with Kyrie, Kevin Durant, in my opinion, should be the one taking each and every game-winning shot for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, I understand it's not going to work like that with matchups, and of course you want to give these other guys a chance to win the game as well. But second choice for me is clearly James Harden. What he can do both around the rim, off the dribble, in the mid-range, and from the three, in my opinion, is all elite. And Kyrie Irving does a lot of those things good or elite as well, but I just don't think at the level of James Harden. James Harden, again, led the league in scoring for multiple years in a row, has averaged 20-plus points per game for the last 10 years in the NBA. Each and every year. He is the guy, in my opinion, who deserves that final shot over Kyrie Irving. Again, I put them both below Kevin Durant, but I would definitely say that those two should be getting it. And Kyrie Irving on most nights should not be leaving the Brooklyn Nets in shots, especially after he missed a week with the team and didn't practice with the team day in, day out. I don't understand the strategy of him taking the most shots. It's not that like these other guys can't create without the ball in their hand or everything like that. James Harden is a player who needs the ball in his hand to create, similar to Kyrie Irving. Kevin Durant, a little bit different. He can create off the ball and still be productive in your offense. But again, when James Harden and Kyrie Irving were playing, it really reminded me of the way Chris Paul and James Harden were playing, which was here's your ball, and every other possession will go ISO. I don't think that's how the Brooklyn Nets really want to play. I think Steve Nash really wanted to do the 7 seconds or less strategy, which fits Kevin Durant and was fitting James Harden the first 2 games that they had without Kyrie. But then once those two came into play, again, it just looked like very Houston Rockets-esque. And I know Mike D'Antoni's on that roster, so he coached James Harden and Chris Paul and then James Harden and Russell Westbrook last year. That's what it looked like. It looked like a 2-man game between Harden and Westbrook or Harden and Chris Paul, where the 2 guards just went ISO and Kevin Durant was sort of just there. That's not how this needs to work for the Brooklyn Nets in order for them to win a championship. They need to go to the 7-second or less strategy. James Harden needs to be taking the second most shots on the team. Kevin Durant needs to be taking the most shots on the team. And Kyrie Irving needs to be the one taking a back seat, playing that Chris Bosh role or that other, whatever third star you want to, Pau Gasol, whatever role you want to label him as. He needs to be taking 20 shots a game, not 28. He needs to be taking less of the game-winning / game-tying shots because Kevin Durant and James Harden are just more trusted with that than him. And I understand that Kyrie probably wants to be the number one guy on this team. He went to Brooklyn for a reason. He grew up a Nets fan. He went home, as he likes to say. But in order for him to win a championship in his hometown, he needs to be the third best player on the team. He doesn't need to be the one dominating possession, dominating shots, throwing up the most threes. I mean, again, when you just look at the shot chart, James Harden went 6 of 14, Kyrie Irving went 15 of 28, and Kevin Durant 12 of 25. Well, then when you look at the three-point shots, the only person who took more threes than Kyrie Irving in the game last night was Kevin Durant, and he only took 1 more. And again, when you look at the minutes, he played so many more than a lot of these other guys. Again, they all played around 50. But at the end of the day, when you're playing, again, 37 points, 2 rebounds, and 3 assists is great for Kyrie Irving, but 28 shots and 8 threes compared to James Harden's 14 shots and 6 threes. It needs to be the reverse. It needs to be the opposite of that. James Harden is a better high-volume shooter than Kyrie Irving is. He shoots better percentages than Kyrie Irving does. And again, both of these guys can also help your offense in different ways. James Harden has clearly found that in Brooklyn, he can really help this offense through the passing, through getting assists, through getting rebounds. James Harden has had a ton of triple-doubles in only his 3 games in Brooklyn. I'm pretty sure he's had 2 out of the 3 games he's played for the Brooklyn Nets so far. I'm not saying that James Harden should abandon that or anything like that, but Kyrie Irving can do those things too. Kyrie Irving can stat pad with the assist numbers as well. He can be the one that initiates the offense and gets people in position. Because right now, James Harden, who's traditionally a shooting guard, and James Harden, who's usually a point guard, have flipped roles. James Harden has been this offense creator, system runner in this Brooklyn system, getting the assists, also getting rebounds, steals, getting triple-doubles, while Kyrie Irving is playing like a 2-guard with minimal assists, minimal rebounds, and just a ton of points and a ton of shots. That's not how they're going to win a championship, in my opinion. It has to be just slightly tweaked. Just flip those 2 roles. I think Kevin Durant has done a good job being his role, being the alpha, for the most part being the late game shot taker at the end of those big moments, at the end of those big games. But at the end of the day, it shouldn't ever be Kyrie. It should be James Harden. And again, if they could just flip roles, have Kyrie be the one putting people in position with the assists and being a true point guard, I think that would serve them better in the long term going forward. And I don't think they'd lose to games like the Cleveland Cavaliers in double overtime when all 3 of those guys were playing 50-plus minutes, which was absolutely ridiculous. That's my 2 cents on the very early start of the Brooklyn's Big 3 trio. Again, it was just their first game together. I'm sure things will evolve over time, but that was my first impression. I really do believe that Kyrie Irving needs to be the one to take that step back, and in fact, he took a step forward in his first game back when he hadn't even played with some of these new look net guys like Harden and some of these other guys that are getting minutes now because of the trade. I really thought that Kevin Durant and James Harden would be taking more shots than Kyrie in that game against Cleveland last night, but Kyrie had other things to say about that. It's going to be interesting to see how the Nets do playing forward. Again, when you have one of these super teams like the Lakers had, like the Miami Heat had, like the Cleveland Cavaliers had, like the Warriors had, each and every single game that they play is going to be scrutinized. Each and every single episode that I do, I will be talking about the Brooklyn Nets that week and how they did and how the trio looked, because they're heavily scrutinized. They have formed a super team. That is a superstar trio where you have 3 top 20 players in the NBA, 2 top 5 players in the NBA playing together at the same time. So the attention and the media focus really and the scrutiny has really gone from the Lakers with LeBron and AD to now the Brooklyn Nets. And that's just how it's going to be for them going forward. And it's going to be an interesting situation to see play out throughout the rest of the NBA season. That's going to do it for this segment. We're going to take a short break here. But on the other side of this short break, I want to get to 2 major NFL news stories breaking that don't have to do with the coaching staffs, which I'll also get to later on in the episode. Philip Rivers has retired from the Indianapolis Colts. Instead of more talking about Philip Rivers and his Hall of Fame career, I'll leave that up to you guys to debate if he's a Hall of Famer or not. I go back and forth with it myself. I don't see a sense in that debate. I want to give you a State of the Union on the Indianapolis Colts and a couple of options on where they could go at the quarterback position, and how high am I on Frank Reich, Chris Ballard, and that entire Indianapolis coaching staff and really organization as a whole. And we'll get to the Dwayne Haskins signing. He officially is back in the NFL. He is signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers to back up Big Ben and potentially be the successor in Pittsburgh. I'll tell you why it's a big move for Pittsburgh and why good things could come for both sides out of this. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my 2 cents on everything Brooklyn Nets. Again, their first game against the Cleveland Cavaliers was not the desired result. Again, you like to see the numbers from KD, Kyrie and Harden statistically, but they, in the end, really got blown out. Again, it was a double overtime game. The Nets were obviously keeping it close, and Cleveland was actually ahead of the game multiple times throughout the entire game. They were up by double digits, if not more, almost at the 20s at some point. They were down, I think, 18 at one point as well. But the Nets clawed back, but couldn't get the victory. Again, it's very early in that big 3-day, but again, since they formed that super team, the level of scrutiny and sort of, they're always going to be under a microscope. It's that level of media attention is only going to grow as the season goes forward. It's going to be an interesting situation to watch for sure. I want to transition now for the rest of the show to the National Football League, which is obviously dominating the headlines. Later on in the show, in the next segment, I will be giving you my letter grades for each and every head coach that has been hired due to the vacating openings. Everyone besides Houston has officially named a head coach. And then, of course, at the end of the show, I'll be giving you my top 10 quarterbacks. But for this segment, I want to talk about 2 topics here. One of them is being the Indianapolis Colts. Where do they go from here with their future quarterback situation and the Dwayne Haskins news? So let's get right into it. Obviously, you all have probably heard the news by now. Philip Rivers, the longtime San Diego / Los Angeles Charger quarterback, and then was obviously the Indianapolis Colts quarterback this year as they made it to the wild card round and then lost to the Buffalo Bills in a really close game. Again, a game that you could have argued they should have won. They left 10 points on the board. But Philip Rivers has retired. He is moving on to a different phase of his career after, I want to say, about 16, 17 NFL seasons. People have been debating if he's a Hall of Famer or not. In my opinion, I'll just say this quickly before we move on. I don't want to get into a huge debate about this. Philip Rivers is a Hall of Famer if Ben Roethlisberger and Eli Manning are Hall of Famers. I understand Philip Rivers doesn't have a Super Bowl, and there's only 5 quarterbacks in the NFL who don't have a Super Bowl but are in the Hall of Fame. I believe Philip Rivers deserves to get one. If Eli Manning, here's the thing. Ben Roethlisberger is better than Philip Rivers. I would definitely say Big Ben. I shouldn't have included him in that category. But if Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer, in my opinion, Philip Rivers is a Hall of Famer. Eli Manning has no stats but the 2 Super Bowl rings. Philip Rivers has the stats but the no Super Bowl rings. They're about at the same level, in my opinion. So if Eli's a Hall of Famer, I believe Philip is. That being said, I'm not sure if he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I know Eli will be a first ballot Hall of Famer, most likely because of his Manning name and the Giants and everything like that. Not sure if Philip will get that same immediate consideration into the Hall of Fame, but eventually I do believe Philip Rivers gets in the Hall of Fame. But what do the Colts do from here? Because in my opinion, the Colts have an absolutely loaded roster with DeForest Buckner, an incredible defense, Quentin Nelson, and a good offensive line. Great young running game with Himes and Taylor. Assuming Marlon Mack moves on in free agency, I don't expect him back with Indianapolis when they have Hines and of course Jonathan Taylor, who was incredible this year. A nice young receiver in Michael Pittman. They have pretty good tight ends in Jack Doyle and Burton. I could see them upgrading at tight end. I could also see them getting a number 1 dominant receiver. Due to T.Y. Hilton's age, he's kind of declined a little bit. But Indianapolis has a ton of cap space. But the biggest issue with them is not their organization. They have a great owner, Jim Irsay. They have a great head coach in Frank Reich, who I believe could win a Super Bowl one day, and in my opinion was the best coach on that Philadelphia Super Bowl roster. I think that can be proven now after Doug Peterson being fired, Frank Reich having an immense success in Indianapolis, that he is the reason why, at least from the coaching perspective, that they won the Super Bowl. He was a better offensive coordinator coach than Doug Peterson was. So he's the head coach of Indianapolis, and they've been incredible, of course, without even having their quarterback of the future yet. Now, if Andrew Luck was still around and still playing for the Indianapolis Colts, I would have picked the Colts, in my opinion, if they had Andrew Luck right now to make it to the AFC Championship game and maybe beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. That's how high I am on the Colts and Frank Reich and Chris Ballard, the incredible general manager. Again, no first-round pick last year because they traded for DeForest Buckner, but they got 2 really good rookies. Jonathan Taylor, who looks like a potential star in the NFL, and Michael Pittman, who looks like a really, really productive wide receiver out of USC as well. Again, if they could add a dominant number 1 guy, if they could add a Chris Godwin in free agency, and Allen Robinson, who knows, maybe he wants to stay in the Midwest. You pair him with a quarterback, and then Indianapolis could seriously be in the Super Bowl sooner rather than later, and I would put them at top of the teams in the AFC. So in my opinion, while we talk about Deshaun Watson, right? how this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A guy like this does not become available. I don't want to talk about Deshaun of the Colts too much because, again, it doesn't. They're a team that could be interested in have the money, and I've mentioned them before, and other reports have mentioned the Colts before as well. But why would the Texans trade him in division? So you have to give up on Deshaun Watson, let down all of your fans and your fan base. Moving him to a division team that you have to play twice a year, it seems like career suicide, in my opinion. I don't think Nick Cassiero would trade him to the Indianapolis Colts. But just like how we say Deshaun Watson, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a guy to just step in, a team to step in and get Deshaun Watson and have their quarterback the next 10, 15 years. Well, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for quarterbacks that this is the perfect situation you want to put yourself into if you're a quarterback looking for a new home. This job, quarterback opening, it's not necessarily a job. I guess it is a job. This quarterback opening is, I think, what we thought that the Patriot quarterback opening was last year. That, whoever the New England Patriots decide to go with their quarterback of the future with is going to be set for life. They have Bill Belichick as a head coach, an incredible defense. Josh McDaniels, an incredible offensive coordinator. They add Cam Newton to the mix, and they have their worst season since Tom Brady was drafted. Again, we thought that whoever could be the New England Patriot head coach or quarterback, I should say, would have instant success and be one of the best quarterbacks in the league just because of the system. That is what actually the reality of the Colts quarterback opening is for them. Whoever they decide to go will have with success. Again, the players that they've had playing quarterback over the last couple of years since Andrew Luck retired, every single one of them has found success. Now, of course, Brissett didn't necessarily make the playoffs, but for Jacoby Brissett, a guy who was the third string in New England, became the backup for the Colts, and nobody expects to be a franchise quarterback. For them to be in the playoff race a majority of the season that he started and have, I believe, at least a 500 record, if not better, is impressive. Then they turn around and get Phillip Rivers, who is clearly on the wit's end of his career, so much so that the Chargers want to move off of him and go into a new, younger direction. When the team that's had you for about 15 years doesn't want you anymore, wants to move off you, it's usually a sign that the quarterback's peak is done. Phillip Rivers comes in with Frank Wright, has one of the most efficient years of his career, gets it all the way to finish second in that division, almost beats out Tennessee for that, and they gave the Bills a better fight than the Baltimore Ravens did in the playoffs. So that says volumes about Frank Wright, Chris Ballard, this entire Colts organization. And again, you just look throughout success. They had success with Peyton Manning, had success with Andrew Luck. Again, this is a team that you want to be a part of. If you're a quarterback on the market, if you are Carson Wentz looking for a new home, if you are Deshaun Watson, you want to go to the Colts, in my opinion. There's no better opening for the quarterback position, maybe in NFL history, than this current Colts job. Again, I really do believe that this team, with the right quarterback, they have the coach, they have the GM, they have the defense, they have the O-line. They could figure out maybe a little bit issues. The O-line isn't the best in the league, but if you add another guy or two to that, then they could seriously become the best in the league. They have one of the best run games in the entire league. Jonathan Taylor's also only going to get better. They just need a number one wide receiver and a quarterback. And lucky for the Indianapolis Colts, I don't want to say those are the two. It's weird. Those are the two easiest and also hardest positions to fill if you're a football team. Your number one star-studded receiver and your number one quarterback. The good news is there's always a lot of them available. There's always a ton of quarterbacks available in the draft every year via free agency, via trade, and there's always a ton of wide receivers available. It's a lot harder to lock down a secure prospect at left tackle or guard that you can convince your fan base that they're the guy moving forward at that position. It's a lot harder to find those nitty-gritty positions than it is to find a quarterback. Again, there's 5 to 7 quarterbacks that enter the draft each and every year that people talk about as potential starters long-term. And for the wide receiver, of course, you can go all the way to round 4 and you can find superstar guys. DK Metcalf, I think, dropped to the early 3rd round, late 2nd round. A.J. Brown was in the 2nd round. These superstar guys at receiver can be found anywhere. And again, we know Chris Ballard is a good drafter. So if you're a quarterback that's potentially looking for a new home, Indianapolis, in my opinion, has to be number one on your list. That's a good thing and a bad thing for Indianapolis. One, they're going to have their pickings from pretty much any quarterback that they want out there that's a trade or free agency, but they don't have that draft pick. They don't have the luxury of being able to immediately know that they're in play for a Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, or even Trey Lance at this point. They're going to be picking 21st overall because of them making the playoffs. I think that puts them out of contention for Trey Lance. So if they're not moving up, the quarterback prospects you're still looking at are guys like Kyle Trask, who has a ton of questions, Mac Jones, in my opinion, who's got a ton of questions, Newman out of Georgia, who opted out, that's got a ton of questions as well. It's not secure anymore. So am I the GM of the Indianapolis Colts? Am I Chris Ballard? Where am I looking for the quarterback position? Well, the first thing I do is call the Houston Texans about Deshaun Watson, and once they hang up the phone almost immediately because they don't want to trade him to a division rival, I call Detroit. Now, Detroit just got Dan Campbell, who is a motivator of men, to say the least, as a new head coach, and I'll talk about that in my next segment. But he doesn't scream like a win-now decision by Detroit. What I mean by that is usually when you hire someone who's a leader of men, a culture setter, a guy like Brian Flores was. He had the defensive coordinator background as well, but a guy like Brian Flores, a guy like Joe Judge, who was a special teams coordinator in New England, when you get these highly motivated guys who players love to play for, you usually give the tip of your hand that you're probably going to go younger, probably go into a rebuild and try to reset the culture in Detroit, which is what I'm expecting Dan Campbell to do, which means moving off of Matt Stafford. I think it's best for both parties. Matt Stafford has given his essentially life to the Detroit Lions, has played hurt multiple times. He has all the numbers, all the statistics, but he's not going to be able to win there. He can't win there now, and he can't win there in the future. And again, he's 32 years old, so he's only getting up there. This is the perfect job for Matt Stafford. And a lot of people have been talking about Matt Stafford to the New England Patriots. And again, I think that makes a ton of sense as well. And that would be my first call if I were the New England Patriots when I'm looking at a future quarterback. I would definitely look for Matt Stafford in New England. But if you're the Indianapolis Colts, you had that much success with a guy like Phillip Rivers. Matt Stafford and Phillip Rivers play a very similar style, except Matt Stafford is literally better at every single thing Phillip Rivers does, besides maybe trash talk. He's got a more lively arm than Phillip. He's definitely more athletic. He's obviously not as old as well. And I don't want to hear about the system and everything like that. Frank Wright is one of the best offensive minds in football. He will make any quarterback work in that system. I'd love to see Matt Stafford on this team and be the best offensive line Stafford's ever played for, probably the best defense Stafford's ever played for, 100% the best coach Stafford's ever played for, best offensive line he's ever played for. You could argue it's an easier division because you don't have to play the Packers twice a year. And of course, the Bears were decent for a certain period of time with Jay Cutler, which is who Stafford had to play. And of course, the Minnesota Vikings had their year with Case Keenum, Kirk Cousins, Brett Favre, of course. So he's played in a really difficult division. Not saying that the AFC South isn't, but the Jacksonville Jaguars are going through a full-fledged rebuild with Urban Meyer. The Houston Texans might be moving off of a superstar quarterback, and the Tennessee Titans are great and all, but they just lost Arthur Smith, who was the offensive coordinator ever since Ryan Tannehill got there, and the real success in Tennessee didn't happen until Arthur Smith really got that offensive coordinator job after Matt LaFleur left to go coach the Green Bay Packers. So how big of a role did he play in Tennessee? So when you're looking at Indianapolis and adding a guy like Matt Stafford in there, you could seriously make the argument, and I would, that Indianapolis would be the best team in that division starting as soon as next year and would be in contention for the AFC Championship game right up there. I'd probably put them as the third best team in the AFC. I'd probably put the Chiefs 1, Buffalo 2, and now that they're keeping Brian Daboll because of the head coaching hires, and then Indianapolis Colts number 3. Matt Stafford should be begging his agent to get him to Indianapolis as soon as possible. Again, you add Matt Stafford there, and then with their first-round pick and the 21st overall pick, you could potentially trade it to a team that might be looking to move off of their wide receiver. There's rumors Atlanta could move off of Julio Jones. Maybe Cleveland is done with Odell Beckham Jr. There's going to be one of those big-time receivers on the market. You can maybe trade that pick for him. You could also go a guy like Kadarius Toney out of Florida at 21. Maybe you trade up a little bit to go after a guy like Jaden Waddle in the top 15. Bateman, of course, out of Minnesota is also available. A lot of receivers in this draft class. It's super deep and everything like that. So you could also address that need through the draft or free agency. Bring in Allen Robinson. And again, you have the cap space to acquire Matt Stafford. You'd bring him to a team that is already ready to win now. Matt Stafford is a win now quarterback. Stafford has all the statistics of a Hall of Fame career already. Has given his life to Detroit. I don't think the fans would really argue that he didn't do enough, or they wouldn't do what Houston fans are doing with Harden right now, burning the jersey or anything like that. And Matt Stafford would finally get a chance to prove that he is an elite quarterback in this league. Statistically, Matt Stafford has been a top 10 quarterback in this league for the better part of the last 10 years. He has been, statistically, when you see it. But at the end of the day, he hasn't gotten that chance to prove on the biggest stage that he's an elite quarterback, go against some of the top defenses. He's never had the coach. He's never had really the weapons ever since Megatron retired. And he's never had the defense either. Indianapolis can provide him all of those things and more while he's still in his prime. Quarterback's prime, in my opinion, goes from probably about 25 to 35. Those are the 10 years that you have that you're at your absolute peak. And usually, unless you're Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, you start to dip down a little bit after the age of 35. And it takes you probably from, 21 to 25 to really get adjusted in the NFL. Your 2 contracts in the middle is your prime, in my opinion. Not your rookie contract, not your last contract, but the 2 mega $1 million contracts that you have in the middle, or the one that if you're Patrick Mahomes signing a 10-year deal, that's your prime. Matt Stafford is still there. If he could capitalize on that with Indianapolis going forward, I think it'd be an awesome story for the NFL. I think it'd be awesome for Matt Stafford. So that's my number one option. Another option that I could see them going, though, is also Jimmy Garoppolo, a guy who is a quick read quarterback, easily makes decisions, doesn't throw a ton of interceptions, high IQ, IQ. I could see Indianapolis going that route. Now, he has some injury concerns, but they have a great offensive line, obviously, in Indy, so that would hopefully help. That's a backup option I could see for them going if Matt Stafford isn't available or something like that. I would say Carson Wentz as my second option. The reason why I say Jimmy Garoppolo or another guy via free agency is because it appears that Philadelphia wants to keep Carson Wentz, and whoever the next head coach, I guess we know now it was the Colts offensive coordinator who was hired to be the next head coach in Philly. His job is actually to fix Carson Wentz. They're not going to be moving off of him. So I would have mentioned Carson Wentz probably as my number 2 behind Matt Stafford. But again, via free agency, you could add a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. Maybe talk to some of these other guys who are veterans and maybe bring them in. I could see them talking to a guy like Jameis Winston potentially. Again, I wouldn't go that route. If you can't get Matt Stafford, I definitely go through the draft unless one of these guys becomes available via trade, obviously, or something like that. So let's talk draft quarterbacks with the Indianapolis Colts. So again, with the 21st pick in the draft, you're not going to be able to land a guy like Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, or Zach Wilson, in my opinion. The guys that they can definitely land are guys like Kyle Trask and Mac Jones. Now, there is a guy in the middle that they might have a chance at landing if they wanted to trade up and make a move, and that's Trey Lance. Now, in my opinion, Trey Lance is a very similar prospect to Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming. Uber talented kid, has all the athletic gifts, big enough in size, of course. He's not as big as Josh Allen or as strong as Josh Allen with the arm ability, but he is a better runner and a more athletic quarterback than Josh Allen was coming out of college. Now, the only issue with Trey Lance is that his entire career, in my opinion, and I don't want to take any credit away from his athletic ability or how good he is, but similar to Josh Allen, his entire career might depend on where he lands in the NFL draft. Josh Allen landed with an incredible organization, with an incredible head coach in Sean McDermott, Brian Daboll, and an awesome coaching staff that let him develop into the player that he is. Trey Lance needs that. He needs an elite coaching staff and pretty much an elite organization to really maximize all of his athletic tools and potential. But if he does, if he puts everything together, he is that prospect that can be Josh Allen and become arguably a top 5 quarterback in the league by year 3. He can do that if he goes to the right team. Now, if Trey Lance unfortunately gets drafted by a team like, I don't know, the New York Jets or actually, I don't know, the Jets have Robert Saleh now. If he gets, drafted by a poor organization with not great head coaching stability, and maybe the guy gets fired after a year or two or something like that, and again, not a great coaching staff, then his career could go off the rails. But if Indianapolis traded up from 21 to maybe the 10 to 15 range, that puts them back in play for Trey Lance. It wouldn't surprise me if Lance went higher, just like Josh Allen did. He went 7th overall. But I think as of right now, a lot of people have him mocked between 10 and 15. Again, a leap from 21 to 15 isn't crazy. A leap from 21 to 10 is a little on the risky side. You'd have to add like a second-round pick or something like that. But I would do it if I were Indianapolis. I would talk to some teams that maybe have multiple first-round picks later on, or a team that is doing a full-fledged rebuild. I talk to teams like the Dolphins. I talk to teams like the Jets, teams that have a lot of picks already. Again, those guys don't pick in the 10 to 15 range, but I would try my best to get in position to secure Trey Lance if I couldn't get Matt Stafford. So number 1 would be Matt Stafford if I were the Indianapolis Colts, besides obviously Deshaun Watson. And then number 2 would be to go after a guy like Trey Lance. If you can't get Matt Stafford or Trey Lance, then I would do an evaluation. I'd stack up a guy like Mac Jones versus a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. Again, Mac Jones is a nice player. I think he's a great leader. And again, I'm a big fan of Tua Tagovailoa. And again, Mac Jones put up similar to better numbers than Tua Tagovailoa. But again, while those guys are the same, and I understand it's lame to say, oh, well, what about the weapons, right? A lot of people will say Mac Jones was only good because of the weapons. Now, we could have said the same thing to Tua Tagovailoa, that he was only good because of the weapons. But I think Tua showed some things with his eye movement and manipulating the defense with his eyes and his feet and even his hips at certain points, and faking out the defense and the football IQ that made him an elite prospect. I don't see all of those things from Mac Jones. I see a guy who's a little bit one read of a quarterback, has a nice arm, not great, and doesn't have a great athletic ability. Again, he won a ton of games. He is definitely a leader, and he's good at getting the balls in the playmakers' hands. He could be good for a team like Indianapolis. If Mac Jones were to succeed, it'd be with a team like Indy or a team like Pittsburgh or a team like New England with elite coaching and things like that. But I don't think Indianapolis goes in that direction. I think Trey Lance or Matt Stafford are the perfect options for them, besides the obvious of Deshaun Watson. But also, if Carson Wentz somehow does be able to shake free, I'd be very intrigued by that as well, especially since the Frank Reich-Carson Wentz connection. But as of right now, Matt Stafford makes a whole lot of sense for me if I'm the Indianapolis Colts and if I'm Colts fan. So that's everything Indianapolis Colts. I want to talk about quickly here for just the next couple of minutes, then I'll get on to grading the head coaching hires and my top 10 quarterbacks at the end of the show. Dwayne Haskins is back in the NFL. He has signed with an NFL team. He was obviously cut by Washington due to everything going on there. He's with the Pittsburgh Steelers now, and I think this is an interesting move for Pittsburgh going forward. So we obviously know Big Ben is at the end of his career. It wouldn't have surprised me if he retired at the end of last season. He's expected to be coming back next year. I believe that will be Big Ben's final year, next year. Dwayne Haskins, if he could learn behind Big Ben, he's already a big, strong kid. Had some issues in Washington. If he could get a fresh start, learn from, again, he goes from an organization with not a lot of stability in Washington to the ultimate stability in Pittsburgh. Same head coach, same general manager, same owner for pretty much Dwayne Haskins' essentially entire life. Tomlin wasn't there the entirety of Haskins' life, but a majority of it, at least him growing up through high school and college and things like that. Mike Tomlin's been in Pittsburgh. If he can learn behind a great guy like Big Ben, they have weapons to support him. They have a great offensive line. They're a pass-happy offense. I think Dwayne Haskins could actually get his career back on track with a team like Pittsburgh. It makes perfect sense for both of these sides. Pittsburgh now doesn't have to go out and draft a quarterback. They have their backup now in Dwayne Haskins, potentially as a potential guy to go forward for the future. You get an entire year of him sitting on the bench through practice each and every day to make your evaluation on him going forward, so you don't have to play Dwayne Haskins this year, assuming Ben Roethlisberger comes back. But 2022 and beyond, keep an eye on Dwayne Haskins in Pittsburgh. It would make a lot of sense going forward if he was their guy of the future, if this wasn't a Josh Rosen situation that the team that got him afterward, gave him a chance and gave him a chance to develop. It's going to be a big year for Haskins. He's super young. I think he's only 23. Let him sit behind Big Ben this entirety of this season, learn the Pittsburgh offense, learn the receivers and things like that. After Big Ben retires, you hand the keys to him for a year. If it works out, it works out. And if not, you could go through the draft. But Dwayne Haskins, a year in your system, so when he's starting in Pittsburgh eventually, he knows the playbook and everything. I could think it could work out for both sides going forward. And maybe Pittsburgh has their successor to Big Ben. Maybe it's Dwayne Haskins. All right, that's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this short break, I'll be grading each and every single one of the head coaching hires. I'll give a small breakdown and then a letter grade for each and every one of those. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this short break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. And if you're a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. We just finished giving you sort of my 2 cents on everything Indianapolis, where I think they go from here with the quarterback position. Again, just like how we all think that Deshaun Watson's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a team to get a quarterback, the Indianapolis Colts, I believe, are a one-in-a-lifetime chance opportunity for a guy looking for a new team to have maybe one of the best setups in the entire NFL. I mean, I wouldn't put them, a lot of teams higher than them in terms of QB destinations. Chiefs, Bills, Packers. That's really it. And then Indianapolis is a team that if they could get a good quarterback, I'd put them right up there with the rest of the Super Bowl contender teams. So now for this segment, I want to continue with the conversations about the NFL and the new head coaches. I want to grade each and every new head coaching hire that has been announced so far. All of the teams besides the Texans have announced one, so they obviously have an incomplete for now. But I'll get to the 6 head coaching hires that have been announced. So let's get right into it. So let's start off with the Lions. The Lions decided to hire Dan Campbell, who I believe came over from the Saints, as is where he worked previously. He has been a head coach before. He was the interim head coach for the Miami Dolphins after they let go of Joe Philbin all those years ago. He went 5-7 as the interim head coach there, was known for his fieriness, for his competitiveness, for the sailor mouth that he has that we've all seen in the press conference, and he's known for being a leader of men. So those are all the positives about Dan Campbell. He's a great guy you want running your football team from a personality standpoint. He's going to make sure your team plays with toughness, that they're disciplined, that they don't go down without a fight. All of those things are great, and a lot of successful head coaches have similar mantras. Mike Tomlin, Joe Judge, Brian Flores, some of these other guys as well are known for their toughness, for their grit, and everything like that. My only issue with the Dan Campbell hiring is while Brian Flores and Joe Judge have been very successful, and Mike Tomlin, of course, with their fiery personalities and their grit and their toughness, all of them also came from a strategic background. Obviously, we know that Brian Flores was the defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots, and Joe Judge was the special teams coordinator. Mike Tomlin is a wizard on offense, as we all know. But Dan Campbell doesn't really come from anything besides motivation and strategy. He is a former player. So in my opinion, the only way Dan Campbell is a successful head coach going forward is if he's got a great staff around him, a good offensive coordinator and a good defensive coordinator. Because I don't know how much input he'll be having on the offense and the defense strategically and game plan wise versus him just being considered the leader of the team and the leader of men and everything like that. So for that reason, it's not an F, but it's also not an A. So right now I'm going to give the Dan Campbell hiring of the Detroit Lions a C. Not good, not bad. Could have done better, though, in my opinion. Next up, we have the Chargers, who hired Brandon Staley, who was the defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams before getting the LA Charger job. Again, he is a good defensive coordinator. They've had a lot of good ones there. Wade Phillips was great. My only issue with Staley, and he hasn't been doing that job for a particularly long time, and also one of the reasons why that defense is so great is because of Ramsey and Aaron Donald. But that's not my main issue with this hire. My biggest issue with this hire isn't Brandon Staley. In fact, I think he'd be a really good head coach for a couple of other teams. But the Chargers didn't need Brandon Staley, in my opinion. They needed an offensive guy, a guy that's going to develop their young superstar quarterback in Justin Herbert. Because now Brandon Staley has to find the right offensive coordinator to nurture Justin Herbert and make sure that he pans out to be the player that he's supposed to be, instead of having a head coach that could fix that. And again, and it's not like there wasn't a guy like that available. Brian Daboll is the guy I would have hired if I were the LA Chargers. I thought it would have been a done deal by now. Daboll working with Josh Allen, making him develop into the player that he was supposed to be, and now he's a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. But the unfortunate circumstance is that he could have left to go coach Justin Herbert in this LA Chargers, and I would have made Buffalo terrible and sad and everything like that. But then if you gave Brian Daboll, Justin Herbert, a more polished, refined prospect version of Josh Allen, the sky would have been the absolute limit for the kid. But instead you bring a guy from across the town in Brandon Staley, who is a good guy and is a decent hire, but it's not the way I would have gone. So I'm going to give it a C+. I almost considered it giving it a B-, and I also considered it giving it a C, just because of the better options available. I really think Brian Daboll would have been absolutely perfect for this job. Not that Brandon Staley won't be a great head coach. He could very well be an absolute superstar. But for Justin Herbert and your offense and your young quarterback, bringing a guy in like Brian Daboll would have been elite in my opinion, or even Eric Bieniemy, a guy like that. So I'm going to give it a C+. Now, the Eagles brought in Nick Sirianni, I believe is how you say his name. He was the Colts offensive coordinator. I'm going to give this one a B for a couple of reasons. One, Philadelphia was the last team to announce that they weren't going to have a head coach. They did a thorough and full-on process, but a lot of these other guys were going to take the other jobs. And again, I don't love what Philadelphia was doing, conducting their business with Carson Wentz and everything like that, and potentially forcing a new head coach to get Carson Wentz and fix him. But the guy they ended up going with was very interesting in my opinion. There was the rumor that the Colts were going to go after Carson Wentz, but instead the Eagles brought the Colts to him by getting Nick Sirianni, the offensive coordinator. Comes from the Frank Reich tree, which immediately means he comes from the Andy Reid coaching tree. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense that you fire Doug Peterson to hire the offensive coordinator of the guy who was the offensive coordinator for Doug Peterson. Seems like it's all kind of the same group, but he's worked under Frank Reich, who had immense success with Carson Wentz, meaning he might adopt a similar offensive system that could make Carson Wentz back into a semblance of the player that he was when they went to the Super Bowl, and potentially he could have won that MVP year if he didn't tear his ACL. So for all those reasons, I am going to give it a B. That was one of the more interesting hires, in my opinion. Now let's move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who got Urban Meyer out of the television booth to be the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're going to get Trevor Lawrence, and they're going through their full rebuild. I gave this one an A-. Again, Urban Meyer, if you told me he was going to be a head coach 5-10 years ago, I would have done giving you some pushback saying he's not proven in the NFL. But again, the NFL more than ever, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, is all about college-oriented offense, the spread system, the RPO game. what Cliff Kingsbury is doing and what some of these other, Matt LaFleur, all the motion and movement and everything like that. The college offense is identically the same thing as the NFL offense. Most of the very effective NFL offenses right now are very similar to college offenses. Again, RPOs, motions, and spread, empty sets, out of the shotgun, less under center play. We've seen this in the NFL. It's working. So Urban Meyer, in my opinion, one of the brightest offensive minds in college football forever, will work in Jacksonville at least a little bit offensively. And again, he knows all the prospects. He's been studying college football. He's been recruiting a lot of these guys at Ohio State, and when he was retired, he was still one of the best college football analysts. In my opinion, I don't see a way that this doesn't at least somewhat work. I'm not saying Super Bowl or anything like that, but more competitive seasons from Jacksonville, an exciting offense with an exciting young quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are on the come up. I'm giving Urban Meyer, the hire of Urban Meyer, I should say, an A- for the Jacksonville Jaguars. For the Falcons, they hired Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans. I thought this was an absolutely home run hire. I didn't think he would take the Falcons job. I thought Arthur Smith would have been great for the Eagles job or the Charger job, but he ended up going to take the Falcons job, which makes a lot of sense. He's an offensive guy. They are absolutely loaded with offensive weapons on talent. Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, obviously. However, this does scream to me that they're going to move off of Matt Ryan. I think Arthur Smith wants to go with more of a mobile quarterback. He is the guy who gets the most credit for fixing Ryan Tannehill's career, making him a backup in this league to an arguably a top 10 quarterback in this league if you want to look at the numbers like that. It's going to be interesting to see how Tennessee does without him. But Arthur Smith, adding a new quarterback potentially, I don't think his job will be trying to get one more title run in with Matt Ryan. I think they'll move off of him, go younger, and this offense could be absolutely explosive next year with a new quarterback potentially in Atlanta and with all those awesome offensive weapons. Arthur Smith, I'm going to give this hire an A for the Atlanta Falcons. I love this partnership. And finally, the Jets hired Robert Saleh. I'm going to keep it straightforward with you. I think it was an A+ hire. Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh together give the best chance the New York Jets have had as a stable organization in years. This head coach is an elite leader of men, an elite defensive mind. Players play hard from him, will attract free agents, and at the same time brings that toughness and grit that we all love about Dan Campbell and some of these other guys. I'm going to give this hire an A+. I think Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh might be the best coach GM combination the Jets have had in the last 20 years easily. If they can nail the quarterback position, whether that be fixing Sam Darnold or going with a different guy, the New York Jets could take off sooner rather than later. The only question is, who is the quarterback going forward? And if it is Sam Darnold, can they fix him? Again, they're bringing in a guy, I think his name is Mike LaFleur, Matt LaFleur's brother, the head coach of the Green Bay Packers. He's going to be the offensive coordinator, a Shanahan-type system. How will Sam Darnold look? It could be interesting for sure. So that's going to do it for this segment of me grading all of the head coaching hires. Again, to recap it, I gave the Dan Campbell hire for the Detroit Lions a C, the Brandon Staley hire for the LA Chargers a C+, the Nick Sirianni hire for the Eagles a B, the Urban Meyer hire for the Jaguars an A-, the Falcons hire of Arthur Smith an A, an A, and the Jets hire of Robert Saleh an A+, and of course the Houston Texans get an incomplete since they haven't hired a head coach yet. Again, that's going to do it for this segment on the
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Other side of this short break, the final segment of today's show, my top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL today. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this final short break. All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network for the final segment of today's absolutely packed show. And like I promised you all, I do want to give you my top 10 NFL quarterbacks in the league right now. I had a really difficult time making this list. A lot of guys had some breakout seasons this year, had to move the list around a couple of times, but I think I have a consensus top 10 list of quarterbacks in the league today, so let's get right into it. Coming in at number 10, I already have a tie between Baker Mayfield and Dak Prescott. Now, for a couple reasons here. Dak Prescott obviously has been an elite quarterback, I would say, throughout his entire years with the Dallas Cowboys. Hasn't necessarily translated to a lot of on-field success some years, but he has been statistically a top 10 quarterback in the league, top 10 to 12. But obviously he was completely out this year, and we don't know how he'll look returning from that really gruesome ankle injury. And Baker Mayfield's sort of the opposite. Didn't have the greatest first 2 years of his career, but now in year 3 looks like a stud. Led the Browns to their best pretty much record since Baker Mayfield's been alive. So I have a combination of those two things. If Baker can continue to do what he's doing this year for the next couple of years, I think he'll solidify himself as a top 10 QB. But right now I have those two tied. So again, coming at number 10, I have Baker and Dak Prescott tied for 10th. At number 9, I have Matt Stafford. I mentioned him earlier on in the show. Again, statistically, he has been a top 10 quarterback each of the last pretty much 7 to 10 years. He's incredible when it comes to yards per attempt, passing yards, has a great touchdown to interception ratio, good completion percentage. He just needs a new home, man, and I really hope Matt Stafford finally gets a chance to be a part of a winning team and winning organization one day. And again, keep an eye on the Indianapolis Colts. I really, really do believe that it'll look really, really nice, those two, if they could partner up the Colts and Matt Stafford, that is. I think special things could happen in Indy if that happens. Coming in at number 8, I have Kyler Murray. Now, he had such a great first half of the season, looked like an MVP candidate, had a couple of injuries, got banged up at the end of the year, and they missed the playoffs. Next year's a big year for Kyler Murray. I expect him to take a year 3 leap, one that Josh Allen has taken. I expect him to be an MVP-level candidate next year and that team to reach double-digit wins. So that's why he's at 8 and isn't pushing top 5 right now. So again, coming in at number 8, I have Kyler Murray. Coming at number 7, I have Lamar Jackson. Again, an elite runner with the ball. Struggles with some aspects of throwing, but in my opinion, he makes enough throws to be considered a top 10 quarterback in the league. He's obviously the most dynamic quarterback in the league when it comes to an athletic ability. Wins 80% of his starts. Got the monkey off his back and won a playoff game this year. I'm so happy for Lamar Jackson that he won that playoff game. Again, the narrative that he couldn't win in the playoffs was bogus in my opinion. He had only played 2 playoff games at that point, but he finally won one, and I'm so happy for Lamar. So I think now everyone considers him to be one of the more elite quarterbacks in this league, and those critics have been silenced with his ability to throw the ball. I love Lamar Jackson, maybe my favorite player to watch in the league. He's coming in at number 7. Number 6 is Tom Brady. I really do believe that he is still pushing top 5 quarterback range in the NFL. The only reason why he's not top 5 right now, not to mention just the incredible names above him, but he does have some inconsistencies now. There are some games where he looks really, really bad and really, really old, to be quite honest with you. Both of the Saints games in the regular season, specifically the second one. But again, all he does is figure out ways to win. He's in his, 12th conference championship game now, 14-2 record with the divisional playoffs. I went on and on about him in my last episode. But again, he's pushing top 5, but I think he's just outside of it right now. So coming in at number 6, Tampa Bay, Tom Brady, 6th best quarterback in the league, in my opinion. Coming at number 5, Josh Allen. The only reason why he's not higher is I want to see him do this for a couple of years now, and I'd like to see him do it without Brian Dable, but that won't happen anymore, obviously, since he will be staying. He did not get a head coaching gig. But Josh Allen, the leap he has made, I wouldn't even consider him top 15, 20 quarterback last year, all the way up to top 5. He should finish probably second in MVP rate voting, in my opinion, behind only Aaron Rodgers, who I'll obviously get to. But what a year for Josh Allen. He's absolutely incredible. And he is the prototypical quarterback I think everybody wants going forward. Mobile, big, strong, and fast. He has all the athletic ability, and it's all coming together now. And he's officially a really accurate quarterback now. After being one of the least accurate quarterbacks in the league, he's now one of the best. Coming in at number 5, I have Buffalo Bill quarterback Josh Allen. Coming in at number 4, I have Russell Wilson. Now, I used to have Russell Wilson as probably the 2nd or 3rd best QB in the league. Had a down season by his standards, in my opinion. I would expect him to rebound next year and have a huge year. But even in a down season for Russell Wilson, he had a quarterback rating over 100, incredible touchdown to interception ratio, and he's still a top 5 quarterback in the league easily. I have him coming in at number 4. Number 3, I have Deshaun Watson, who's coming off a career year, highest completion percentage, most yards he's ever thrown, highest yards per attempt, has had his highest completion percentage while also leading the league in passes attempted, which is something that doesn't really go hand in hand. Usually the more passes you throw, the more you're going to incomplete, so your completion percentage goes down. His went up. He's the 3rd best quarterback in football, in my opinion. On some days, he looks like the best QB in the NFL. Free Deshaun Watson, get him to a Miami or a San Francisco or in Indianapolis by some miracle or something like that. Get him with a winning team and winning organization. And if you can get Deshaun Watson, it puts you in Super Bowl contention, in my opinion. You have that high-level quarterback with him. He's an MVP candidate. I think he'll win one day. And if he gets out of Houston, I think he'll win a Super Bowl one day as well. So coming in at number 3, I have Deshaun Watson. Coming in at number 2, I have Aaron Rodgers, who in my opinion should win MVP this year. The efficiency that he plays with is ridiculous. He has to be the most efficient quarterback of all time, in my opinion. And at the end of the day, he's definitely a top 2 quarterback in football. He's probably the best QB in football this year, but overall I have him coming in at number 2, Aaron Rodgers, and the Green Bay Packer quarterback. Absolutely incredible what the year he's having this year. And maybe we'll see a potential Super Bowl matchup of the first best quarterback being Patrick Mahomes, obviously, and Aaron Rodgers. Mahomes is clearly the best quarterback in the league. Now, Rodgers did close the gap a little bit this year. He had a better year than Mahomes did, but at the end of the day, I treat the Kansas City Chiefs like the Golden State Warriors. They are the best, and I'm not sure how close it really is, but at the end of the day, Patrick Mahomes is the reason why that Chief team is so good. He is the best quarterback in the league right now, but it is closer than people think, in my opinion. Before, I used to think it's not close. Now, a couple guys, Watson, Allen, Rodgers, they're making it closer than maybe it appears to be for some people. That's going to do it for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Before I let you go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general, and follow us on all social media platforms, again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I have been your host, Alex Masfer. See you all in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.